Year, a new pastor arrived at Times Square Church. He was a young man from rural Canada, a former cop named Carter Conlon. David Wilkerson's younger brother Don was also a pastor at the church, and one day he asked his son Todd, now my radio announcer, if Todd and I could take Pastor Carter's teenage sons out for a bite after the service to be hospitable. So we did. We took them right next door to Beefsteak Charlie's. Today it's a McDonald's, and had some food and talked. But what did two New Yorkers in their 20s say to teenagers from the wilds of Canada? Did you guess that we talked about hockey? We did. Little did I dream then that brand new pastor would grow into the extraordinary man of God that he is, genuinely humble and loving and a spiritual father to so many, that he, in fact, would become the senior pastor of the church and would be leading its flock nearly a quarter of a century later. 2 years later, Suzanne and I got married, and Don Wilkerson performed the service. And then life somehow took the two of us to a number of other churches. But whenever we went back to visit Times Square Church, it was precisely the same. The worship and preaching were as powerful as anything I'd ever experienced. In 2009, I went through a particularly tough patch of life, including depression, and I needed help, so I decided to go back to Times Square Church every Tuesday night. The preaching and the worship in all their fire and joy were precisely as they had been 15 years earlier. I was astounded and deeply grateful. I found the presence of God there during those services in a way that I desperately needed, and week by week I clung to God and slowly climbed out of my deep pit. Many times before the services, I would do what many people have done for years and still do today. I would go right up to the altar, which is the theater stage, and shut my eyes and pray. If it's possible to feel an anointing, and of course it is, I always felt the anointing of God there. The prayers that have gone up to heaven from that sanctuary since it opened are beyond counting. But I also know that all those on the pastoral staff and in other parts of Times Square Church are devoted to prayer. You cannot fake that, though some have tried, and the consistency of God's presence there is a testament to that day in and day out reality. Now, all these years later, I have been given the great honor and privilege of sometimes preaching from that blessed pulpit. And by God's grace, the services and the joy and presence of God are still just the same at Times Square Church as they were the day I walked into that building nearly 30 years ago. I've been to hundreds of churches, but in all this time, I simply have never experienced anything quite like Times Square Church. This is not to say that there aren't extraordinary churches elsewhere, but the grittiness and despair that one finds rather dramatically in evidence in New York, combined with the desperation of many of those who have attended, create an atmosphere in which one is utterly uninterested in playing church, in which prayers are earnest and powerful, and gratitude, expressed in worship, is similarly earnest and powerful. Over all these years, it is still the same. At nearly every service, people weep and others literally leap for joy. If we ask what makes Times Square Church what it is, there can only be one answer, and the pastors there have been saying it since the church opened in 1987. It is prayer. That's it. You can't worship the way they do and preach the way they do and see lives change the way they do without prayer. It's at the heart of the miraculous transformation of every life committed to following Jesus, and it is at the heart of everything else worth talking about. So I wish everyone I know could experience what I've experienced at Times Square Church, could see that holiness and joy are two sides of the same coin, could see that worshiping God can be the most honest and beautiful and joyful thing you will ever do, could see that fervent prayer is part of the normal Christian life and that without it, we are less than who God made us to be. Attending Times Square Church can be one way to see all those things, but if you can't attend there, or even visit, how wonderful it would be if the man whom God has used all these years to lead this church would write a book on the principal component behind what God is doing in that church, on prayer. Well, by God's grace, that man, whom I'm deeply privileged to call a friend, has done just that. And you are holding it in your hands. This book is the fruit of a life poured out in love for Jesus and for others. May the God who loves you and longs for your prayers use it to transform you as others have been transformed before you to his